The truth does not knock politely on the front door. Sometimes it kicks the door completely off the hinges, shatters the frame, and demands that everyone in the room drop their cheap disguises. Most people do not actually hate intelligence, truth, or authenticity. What they absolutely despise is what your intelligence, your truth, and your undeniable authenticity make them feel about their own manufactured, highly curated lives. Chosen ones, if you are listening to this right now, you have been sitting in the quiet, observant corner of a very loud, chaotic, and desperately performative room. You have been feeling the heavy, confusing, and intensely toxic energy of individuals who smiled warmly to your face while quietly sharpening their knives in the shadows. You have been navigating the treacherous, exhausting waters of profound spiritual awakening, dealing with people who tried to mimic your light, steal your spiritual blueprints, and subtly engineer your downfall, all while masquerading as your closest friends, allies, or neutral bystanders. They genuinely thought they were being incredibly clever. They believed their masks were absolutely flawless and that their hidden agendas were completely undetectable. But a massive, irreversible spiritual shift has just occurred, and the overarching reality of your dynamic has completely inverted. They finally realized that you knew all along. The entire time they thought they were executing a masterstroke of manipulation against you, you were silently, patiently letting them play themselves. Now, the devastating realization has hit their fragile egos like a runaway freight train. The theatrical curtain has dropped. The house lights have violently flickered on, and a crushing, suffocating wave of utter foolishness is washing over them. They are currently melting down over your success, your stability, and your deeply unbothered nature because your mere existence is exposing the vacuous reality of their own lives. We are going to break down exactly why their realization is destroying their performative identities, why they are frantically scrambling to maintain a facade you have already seen through, and the deep psychological mechanics of their quiet panic. Let us get into it. Before we dive into the core analysis, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, drop a comment with what point hit you hardest, and share the video with someone who needs the reminder. Number 1. They never expected you to survive long enough to see their true faces. There is a specific breed of profound arrogance that infects the deeply insecure. They operated under the incredibly misguided assumption that the spiritual, emotional, and physical obstacles strategically placed in your path would be the absolute end of your journey. They sat back in the bleachers of your life, eating the popcorn of their own delusion, eagerly waiting for your inevitable collapse. They threw hidden stones, whispered behind your back, and contributed to the friction of your life, fully believing you would crumble under the weight. They assumed your spirit was as fragile as their ego, and they banked their entire emotional safety on your ultimate failure. When we contrast your reality with theirs, the divergence is staggering. Your authentic, hard-earned internal alignment was forged in the dark. You were stacking heavy bricks on solid ground, silently building an impenetrable fortress of resilience while nobody was watching. You learned to metabolize pain into wisdom. In stark contrast, their entire existence is built on borrowed, insecure, performative scaffolding. They require constant external validation just to feel alive. They never developed the internal shock absorbers required to survive the spiritual warfare you have gracefully navigated. Because they know they would not have survived what you survived, they projected their own weakness onto you, entirely miscalculating your spiritual density. The deep psychology behind their current meltdown is rooted in the terrifying loss of narrative control. They wanted to write the final chapter of your story, branding you a tragedy so they could feel like a triumph. Seeing you not only survive but thrive forces them to realize they possess absolutely no power over your destiny. They are experiencing a complete, devastating collapse of their perceived superiority. The person they secretly bet against has just crossed the finish line entirely unbothered by the hurdles they set up. Think of their behavior as a frantic, disorganized attempt at stacking flimsy playing cards on a windy table. They are desperately trying to build a towering, impressive structure out of paper-thin lies and illusions, constantly adjusting, constantly panicking as the undeniable breeze of your truth blows through the room. Meanwhile, you are miles away, quietly stacking bricks on solid ground, completely unaffected by the changing weather. From the outside, their frantic scrambling looks incredibly goofy. It is a tragic, exhausting display of a person trying to forcefully manipulate the wind rather than simply building a house that can withstand it. They feel profoundly foolish because they realize they spent years betting their entire identity against a force of nature, and now they are left standing in the rubble of their own pathetic expectations. Number 2. You force people to confront the authentic intelligence they abandoned for cheap applause. People who live highly performative, toxic lives did not necessarily start out as entirely empty shells. At some pivotal point in their journey, they encountered a profound crossroads where they had to choose between the difficult, isolating path of deep truth or the easy, heavily applauded path of superficial conformity. They actively chose the applause. They abandoned their critical thinking, their deep intuition, and their raw authenticity because maintaining those things made them an outcast in a world that worships the fake. They buried their intelligence beneath heavy layers of social conditioning, shallow trends, and the safe, sterile scripts provided by a stagnant society. You, chosen ones, represent the terrifying living alternative. You represent the exact path they were too cowardly to take. Your authentic, unwavering alignment with your internal compass is a walking, breathing indictment of their cowardice. You did not sell out. You did not dilute your massive personality to fit into rooms that were far too small for your spirit. You maintained your intellectual and spiritual sovereignty, even when it meant standing entirely alone in the wilderness. When they interact with you, they are not just dealing with another person. They are dealing with the ghostly, resurrected version of the vast potential they murdered in themselves years ago. This is exactly why they behave with such subtle, creeping hostility toward you. Their fragile egos simply cannot handle the cognitive dissonance of standing next to someone who is entirely whole while they are painfully fragmented. They rely on everyone around them participating in a shared hallucination, a script that fundamentally says, "We are all faking it, so nobody point it out." You refuse to follow that script. Your mere presence violently disrupts their frequency and highlights their fraudulence. They fear the profound stagnation they feel within themselves, and your continuous, undeniable growth highlights exactly how long they have been standing completely still. It is exactly like watching someone wearing incredibly flashy jewelry they cannot actually afford, parading around a high society party, desperately hoping no one asks to inspect the diamonds. They are draped in borrowed confidence, wearing a counterfeit personality that looks incredibly shiny from a distance, but feels cheap, hollow, and fragile up close. You are the master jeweler walking into the room. You do not even have to say a single word. Your very presence makes them sweat profusely. They know that you know. They look completely frantic, adjusting their fake chains, lowering their voices, and avoiding eye contact, because the spiritual mechanics of authenticity dictate that the fake will always tremble in the absolute presence of the real. They melt down because your intellect is not an act, and their entire life is a low-budget performance. Number 3, you allowed them to play a game you had already mastered. One of the most hilarious and deeply tragic aspects of the performative, toxic individuals in your life is their absolute conviction that they are the smartest person in any given room. They pride themselves on their ability to casually manipulate social dynamics, whisper the right lies into the right ears, and subtly maneuver pieces on the board to isolate you. They assumed that because you were quiet, polite, and peaceful, you were utterly clueless to their machinations. They mistook your grace for a complete lack of situational awareness. The contrast between your internal architecture and their external theater could not be more extreme. You operate from a place of deep, spiritual observation and sovereign autonomy. You possess a panoramic view of human nature, earned through years of painful introspection and psychological unmasking. You do not react. You simply observe. You meticulously catalogue and you calibrate. They, on the other hand, are highly reactive, impulsive, and completely reliant on the immediate emotional response of their targets. Their entire strategy depends on you violently reacting to their provocations, thereby making you look unhinged while they play the innocent victim. Their deep psychological terror stems from the realization that you never took the bait. By refusing to react, you essentially let them walk themselves into an elaborate trap of their own making. Their fear of stagnation makes them constantly initiate drama just to feel relevant. But when you offer them absolute, unbaited silence, they lose all control of the narrative. Their ego begins to cannibalize itself. They realize that the entire time they thought they were secretly setting a trap for you. You were standing entirely outside the maze, watching them furiously dig their own grave, entirely unbothered by the dirt they were throwing. It is exactly like watching a highly aggressive toddler trying to hustle a seasoned grandmaster in a high-stakes game of chess. The toddler is slamming pieces down, knocking over pawns, screaming checkmate when their own king is completely exposed, while the grandmaster simply sits back, sipping tea, waiting for the child to tire themselves out. From the outside, the imitator's behavior is spectacularly goofy. It is a frantic, exhausting performance of shadowboxing. They are sweating, swinging wildly at the air, exerting massive amounts of energetic currency, only to finally look up and realize you left the gymnasium hours ago. They feel utterly foolish because they finally see the massive, unbridgeable disparity in your intellectual and spiritual weight classes. Number 4. Their entire performance relied exclusively on your presumed blindness. When an insecure person constructs a false narrative or a performative identity, that identity is incredibly brittle. It has absolutely no internal structural integrity. It is entirely upheld by the gullibility and the blind compliance of the audience. The people who tried to compete with you, the ones who secretly tried to mimic your cadence, steal your ideas, or hijack your radiant light, built their entire deceptive strategy around the arrogant assumption that you simply would not notice. They thought you were too busy, too naive, or too inherently trusting to catch the subtle, venomous microaggressions and the quiet theft of your spiritual and intellectual property. Your authentic journey, however, has refined your intuition into a highly calibrated, undeniably accurate instrument. You see directly behind the veil. You do not just listen to what people say. You deeply observe the energetic frequency beneath their words. You notice exactly when their eyes do not match their enthusiastic smiles. You notice when their compliments are heavily laced with a bitter, competitive undertone. While they are desperately seeking external validation and relying on a fragile script of counterfeit charm, you are resting securely in your internal alignment. You do not need them to be real for you to be okay, which completely and permanently neutralizes their power over you. The psychology of their meltdown is deeply rooted in the utter humiliation of exposure. Imagine the sheer, visceral panic of a cheap street magician who realizes that the one person sitting in the front row has a mirror angled perfectly to see exactly how all the tricks are done. Their fragile ego cannot process the agonizing shame of being perceived accurately. They desperately need to be seen as they wish to be, not as they actually are. When they realize that you have seen the massive insecurity beneath their loud bravado, the burning jealousy beneath their flattery, and the profound emptiness beneath their constant boasting, they experience a catastrophic narcissistic collapse. Metaphorically, it is like a terrible actor pouring their heart and soul into a dramatic, sweeping monologue on a grand stage, demanding tears and applause, only to slowly realize that the only person sitting in the audience is holding the script, silently circling all the lines they are completely butchering. It is tragic, and it is painfully uncomfortable to watch. They look frantic, sweating under the stage lights, increasing the volume of their performance, hoping that if they just act louder, you will magically forget the truth. But you simply sit there, deeply analytical, unapologetic, and completely immune to the theatrics. They feel immensely foolish because they realize they have been performing for a master judge who absolutely cannot be bribed by cheap illusions. Number 5. They mistook your unbroken surgical silence for ignorance. In the broken economy of toxic social dynamics, chaotic noise is very often mistaken for power. The people who actively tried to bring you down are individuals who constantly fill the air with gossip, defensive justifications, loud proclamations of their own success, and frantic attempts to control their public image. They genuinely believe that whoever speaks the loudest, the fastest, and the most frequently is the one who ultimately controls the reality of the situation. Because you chose the elevated path of silence, supreme restraint, and calculated observation, they arrogantly assumed you had absolutely nothing to say. They thought your silence was born of weakness, fear, or a complete lack of awareness regarding their deceptive behavior. The contrast between your profound, disciplined restraint and their chaotic, constantly leaking energy is immense. Your silence is a deliberate architectural choice. It is a fortified steel vault where you securely store your peace, your focus, and your energetic currency. You absolutely do not waste your breath defending yourself to people who are entirely committed to misunderstanding you. Their noise, however, is a frantic, desperate leakage of profound insecurity. They are constantly talking because they are absolutely terrified of what they might hear if they ever allowed the room to get quiet. They need the constant reverberating echo of their own voice to reassure them that they actually exist, because without external validation, they are spiritually hollow. When they finally realized that your silence was not ignorance, but rather a highly intentional, tactical quarantine of their toxic energy, their psychology violently shattered. The hater behaves this way because silence acts as a flawless mirror. When you do not react, you do not provide them with the emotional ammunition they desperately need to justify their unprovoked malice. By remaining completely silent, you force them to sit alone in a quiet room with the grotesque, undeniable reality of their own behavior. Their fragile ego begins to panic because they are no longer in control of your emotional thermostat. You refuse to step into the ring, leaving them shadowboxing the air, looking utterly deranged. Think of their behavior as someone standing at the edge of a massive, echoing canyon, screaming vicious insults into the void, desperately waiting for the canyon to fight back. But the canyon does absolutely nothing. It just sits there, vast, immovable, and ancient, merely bouncing their own distorted, angry voice right back at them. The louder they scream, the more their throat bleeds, and the more they are forced to listen to the ugliness of their own spirit. You are that canyon. Your grand, immovable peace highlights their frantic, microscopic anger. They realize they look entirely foolish because they have expended all their energy trying to move a mountain that does not even acknowledge their existence. Number 6. You fundamentally refuse to validate the counterfeit reality they desperately constructed. Toxic, highly performative individuals do not just lie to other people. They systematically and obsessively lie to themselves to survive the crushing weight of their own inadequacy. They construct elaborate counterfeit realities where they are always the ultimate hero, the smartest innovator, or the flawless, innocent victim. They heavily curate their social media, manipulate their friend groups, and rewrite history on a daily basis to ensure this fragile hologram remains entirely intact. They aggressively demand that everyone around them participate in this mass delusion, nodding along and validating the fake currency they are constantly trying to spend. Your authentic, hard-earned alignment absolutely forbids you from participating in mass hallucinations. You operate strictly in the high-frequency realm of raw, unvarnished truth. You understand deeply that honoring a lie is a direct insult to your own spiritual intelligence. While they are desperately seeking external validation for a life they do not actually live, you are quietly living a robust life that requires absolutely no external validation. You do not care if people see your internal battles. You care that you are actually winning them. You do not care about the hype. You care exclusively about the healing. Because you refuse to applaud their counterfeit reality, you become the ultimate, terrifying threat to their psychological survival. They behave with such intense, underlying hostility toward you because your refusal to validate them feels like an existential attack on their very life. Their deep fear of stagnation and their horrifying loss of control trigger a primal panic within them. If you do not believe their mask is real, then the mask might not be real. And if the mask is not real, they are violently forced to confront the terrifying emptiness beneath it. They hate you not for anything you actively did to them, but for what you absolutely refuse to do for them. You refuse to be an extra in their low-budget movie. You refuse to provide the energetic supply they need to keep their fragile ego inflated. It is exactly like watching a deeply arrogant person walk into a highly secure federal bank and arrogantly try to slam a stack of brightly colored Monopoly money onto the counter, loudly demanding that the teller deposit it into their account. They are putting on a massive show for the other customers, acting rich, acting important, acting untouchable. You are the bank teller. You do not scream. You do not cause a scene. You do not even argue. You simply look at the cheap, pay-per-play money, look back at them with calm, deeply analytical eyes, and slide it right back across the marble counter. The sheer, suffocating embarrassment they feel in that quiet moment is what is destroying them. They feel intensely foolish because they know that you know exactly how broke their spirit truly is. Number 7. They finally see the terrifying, unbridgeable gap between your spiritual architecture and theirs. When we talk about human development and authentic growth, there is a fundamental, massive difference between building a solid foundation and merely erecting temporary scaffolding. For years, the people secretly competing with you focused entirely on the superficial. They tirelessly chased the titles, the aesthetic, the associations, and the loud, boastful milestones. They built a massive, glittering facade that looked incredibly impressive from a distance, but had absolutely zero structural integrity beneath the surface. They falsely assumed that because their scaffolding went up faster than your foundation, they were winning the ultimate race. You, chosen ones, took the brutal, unglamorous, highly isolating path. You spent years in the dark, digging deep into the thick mud of your own trauma, unlearning toxic generational cycles, and painstakingly laying down heavy, solid bricks of internal alignment. It was not pretty. It did not garner massive applause. It was a silent, agonizing process of genuine spiritual architecture. You prioritized internal peace over external performance. Now that the heavy storms of life have inevitably arrived, the absolute, terrifying disparity between your two structures is on full public display. The imitator is currently experiencing a profound psychological meltdown because the violent weather of life is aggressively testing their building. The deep psychology of their panic lies in the realization that they absolutely cannot fake structural integrity. When the wind blows, their fragile ego, heavily reliant on external validation and borrowed scripts, begins to sway, crack, and violently groan. They look over at you, fully expecting to see you panicking in the exact same storm, only to find you sitting quietly, completely unmoved, drinking tea inside a fortress of solid stone. Their fear of stagnation morphs into a paralyzing fear of total collapse. They realize they wasted their entire life meticulously painting the outside of a house that is currently rotting from the inside. Use the vivid metaphor of stacking cards on a windy table versus stacking heavy bricks on solid ground. They spent years meticulously balancing flimsy, slippery playing cards, holding their breath, aggressively demanding that nobody in the room sneeze or move too quickly, lest their entire identity come crashing down. Their life requires exhausting, constant environmental control. Your life is made of heavy, undeniable bricks. You do not care if the table shakes. You do not care if the wind howls. You do not require a heavily controlled environment because your massive strength is inherent, not circumstantial. Watching them frantically try to shield their fragile house of cards from the wind of the real world is incredibly tragic. They feel fundamentally foolish because they realize they traded indestructible resilience for a cheap, temporary illusion that is actively falling apart. Number 8. The crushing exhaustion of maintaining a mask that never actually fooled you. Lying is an incredibly expensive, highly draining, energetic endeavor. To consistently uphold a false identity, to constantly pretend to be more enlightened, more successful, or more secure than you actually are, requires a massive daily expenditure of caloric and spiritual energy. The people who tried to manipulate you have been running on an extreme energetic deficit for years. They have to constantly remember which lie they told to which person. They have to carefully orchestrate their public appearances, and they have to perpetually monitor their surroundings for any subtle sign that the mask is slipping. Contrast this immense, draining, suffocating labor with the absolute ease of your authenticity. When you are aligned with your deep internal truth, you do not have to remember anything at all. You do not have to nervously manage your image, because your image is simply a natural, effortless byproduct of your actual character. You move with a fluid, grounded grace that requires absolutely zero conscious effort to maintain. Your internal alignment continuously generates massive energy, whereas their external performance constantly consumes it. They see your effortless existence, and it absolutely infuriates them, not just because they hate you, but because they are so profoundly, deeply tired. The psychology of their current frantic state is defined by a deep, unspoken burnout and a terrifying loss of control. They are exhausted, and the most devastating part of their exhaustion is the recent crushing realization that all of their incredibly hard work was completely in vain. They performed this incredibly demanding, suffocating theater specifically to deceive you, to impress you, or to outshine you, only to realize you saw right through the mask on day one. Their fragile ego is actively collapsing under the monumental weight of cognitive dissonance. They sacrificed their peace, their genuine joy, and their actual soul to put on a grand show for an audience member who was never even fooled for a second. Metaphorically, it is exactly like watching someone insist on wearing a massive, incredibly heavy, suffocating papier-mâché mascot head to a relaxed summer picnic, simply because they desperately want everyone to think they are taller and more impressive. They are sweating profusely. They can barely breathe. They are clumsily bumping into tables, and their vision is completely restricted. Meanwhile, you are sitting comfortably in the shade, secure in your own skin, just watching them stumble around. They absolutely refuse to take the mask off because they are terrified of being ordinary, but the mask is slowly suffocating them to death. They look frantic, stumbling over their own feet in a desperate attempt to look majestic. They finally feel undeniably foolish because they realize you never thought they were a giant. You just thought they were suffocating in a prison of their own making. Number 9. Your absolute lack of revenge has become their ultimate psychological punishment. When dealing with highly performative, toxic, or insecure individuals, you must deeply understand that they operate on a very specific, low vibrational frequency of conflict. They understand revenge perfectly. They understand petty behavior. They understand tit-for-tat warfare, because that is the exact cheap currency they trade in every single day. When they betrayed you, lied about you, or tried to systematically sabotage your progress, they mentally prepared themselves for your furious counterattack. They braced for the massive explosion. They actually wanted you to attack them because your revenge would give them the ultimate highly coveted prize, the ability to play the eternal innocent victim. Your authentic, highly elevated response completely short-circuited their psychological wiring. You did not attack. You did not launch a frantic smear campaign. You did not waste a single drop of your precious energetic currency trying to destroy them. You simply observed their betrayal, processed the lesson, adjusted your boundaries to impenetrable steel, and elevated your frequency. You walked away with a calm, deeply unapologetic grace. This response is utterly incomprehensible to a mind that is entirely trapped in the mud. By refusing to seek revenge, you robbed them of the victim narrative they so desperately needed to justify their own atrocious behavior. This creates a terrifying psychological loop for the imitator. Their fragile ego is now heavily burdened with the full, unmitigated weight of their own guilt. Because you did not punish them, they are forced to severely punish themselves. They are perpetually waiting for the other shoe to drop, living in a state of paranoid hypervigilance, absolutely terrified that your silence is just the calm before a massive destructive storm. Their fear of loss of control drives them to pure madness. They cannot understand how someone could hold the power to completely destroy them and simply choose not to use it. It forces them to painfully acknowledge a level of moral and spiritual superiority in you that completely shatters their competitive illusion. Metaphorically, it is like a vicious game of tug-of-war where they are pulling with all their might, their face red, their veins popping, leaning all their weight backward, fully expecting you to pull back and engage in a grueling, muddy struggle. Instead of pulling back, you simply open your hands and drop the rope. You walk away to wash your hands. Because they were applying so much aggressive, hateful force, the sudden lack of resistance sends them violently flying backwards into the thick mud of their own making. They are lying there covered in dirt, looking incredibly goofy and utterly humiliated, staring at the clean, departing back of a person who fundamentally refused to play their dirty game. They feel entirely foolish because they completely defeated themselves. Number 10. They are trapped inside the claustrophobic shadow of their own unprovoked malice. There is a very specific, heavy karmic debt that is instantaneously incurred when a person attacks someone who meant them absolutely no harm. The people who targeted you were not acting out of a place of self-defense. They were acting out of a dark, unprovoked envy. You were merely existing in your authentic lane, minding your own business, and quietly cultivating your own beautiful garden. They looked over the fence, saw the abundant fruit of your labor, and rather than watering their own barren soil, they decided to throw poison over the wall. They arrogantly thought this would diminish your bright light and somehow magically transfer your harvest directly to them. The striking contrast here is the profound difference between a clean conscience and filthy hands. Your internal alignment allows you to sleep peacefully at night. You know that whatever you have achieved, you earned through righteous labor and unwavering faith. You carry no hidden daggers. Their external facade, however, is heavily polluted by the secret knowledge of what they did in the dark. They have to wake up every single morning and look in the mirror at a person who actively tried to destroy pure, innocent potential. They are violently forced to live with the terrifying reality that their soul is fundamentally compromised by unprovoked malice. The deep psychology behind their current meltdown is the inescapable nature of spiritual gravity. What goes up must absolutely come down, and what is sent out must inevitably return. They are currently experiencing the suffocating backdraft of their own toxicity. Because you did not absorb their poison, because you metabolized their negativity into high-octane fuel for your own rise, their poison had nowhere to go but straight back to the sender. They are terrified because they are witnessing your continuous, blessed elevation, while they are entirely paralyzed by deep stagnation. Their fragile ego is actively collapsing as they realize the universe absolutely does not reward unprovoked treachery. Think of their actions exactly like a person maliciously poisoning the only well in a small village, thinking they have secured ultimate power by controlling the water supply, only to realize too late that you packed up and moved to a lush, overflowing river months ago. Now, they are the only ones left in the barren village, and they are dying of thirst, staring down into the dark, toxic water they poisoned with their own hands. It is a deeply tragic, entirely self-inflicted isolation. From the outside, their frantic attempts to find clean water look absolutely pathetic. They feel completely foolish because they finally understand that their unprovoked malice did not destroy your future. It permanently polluted their own. Number 11. The agonizing realization that they were merely the supporting cast in your origin story. Toxic, highly performative individuals suffer from severe terminal main character syndrome. They deeply, fundamentally believe that the entire universe revolves around their specific desires, their timeline, and their specific emotional needs. They view everyone around them as completely expendable non-player characters, existing only to serve their grand narrative. When they arrogantly inserted themselves into your life, trying to actively manipulate your path or claim dominance over your spirit, they fully believed they were the powerful protagonist, putting a minor, insignificant character firmly in their place. Your authentic journey, however, operates on a completely different, infinitely higher divine script. You are a chosen one. Your path is guided by deep spiritual laws, profound growth, and an unavoidable destiny that cannot be hijacked by lower frequency entities. While they were busy trying to write you completely out of the story, you were silently transcribing the heavy lessons of their betrayal into the ultimate blueprint for your massive success. You utilized their hate as a whetstone to expertly sharpen your own discernment. You did not let them break you. You systematically used them to build yourself. The psychological collapse they are currently enduring is deeply rooted in the ultimate ego death, absolute insignificance. As they watch you rise entirely unbothered, stepping boldly into your power and your purpose, the horrifying truth completely dawns on them. They were never the main character in this dynamic. They were not even a formidable, memorable villain. They were merely a temporary speed bump, a minor spiritual pop quiz, a brief moment of necessary friction designed entirely to launch you into your next level of greatness. Their grand, dramatic attempts to destroy you simply served as the foundational law of your inevitable victory. It is exactly like a tiny, insignificant pebble lying in the middle of a vast, roaring river, arrogantly believing that because the water briefly splashed against it, it somehow successfully altered the course of the mighty ocean. The river simply flows over the pebble, perfectly smoothing out its rough edges, and continues its unstoppable journey to the sea, leaving the pebble permanently stuck in the thick mud at the bottom, exactly where it started. They look incredibly goofy, realizing their massive, exhausting efforts to stop you only massively accelerated your momentum. They feel overwhelmingly foolish because they genuinely thought they were burying you, completely unaware they were actually planting you. Number 12. You forced them to confront the authentic self they murdered for applause. This is perhaps the absolute deepest, most painful psychological reality the imitator must inevitably face. Long before they met you, they had a choice. They possessed their own unique quirks, their own organic interests, and their own authentic voice. But they surveyed the world, saw that authenticity was often met with rejection, and they made the tragic, cowardly decision to commit spiritual suicide. They actively killed their true self and rapidly replaced it with a highly curated, easily digestible, socially acceptable avatar designed exclusively to farm cheap applause and external validation. You, however, flatly refuse to make that horrific trade. You possess a bold, unapologetic internal alignment that absolutely refuses to bow to the gallery. You embraced the isolation, the deep misunderstanding, and the heavy burden of being entirely different. You endured the profound loneliness of the wilderness, and in doing so, you beautifully preserved your soul. You walk into a room and you do not perform. You simply exist. You do not contort your personality to make insecure people feel comfortable. You constantly vibrate at a frequency of raw, unedited truth. When they look at you, they do not just see a competitor, they see a terrifying, undeniable ghost. They behave with such frantic, visceral hatred toward you because you heavily trigger a profound, unprocessed grief within them. You are the living, breathing manifestation of the bravery they fundamentally lacked. Their fragile ego relies entirely on a script that says, "Everyone fakes it to survive." Your refusal to fake it completely shatters their entire worldview. They hate you because you are completely free, and they are lifelong prisoners of public opinion. They see the massive confidence, but not the internal battles. They see the supreme calm, but not the resilience. They see the crown, but absolutely not the scars. Metaphorically, it is exactly like watching someone who hollowed out a magnificent ancient tree, painted the dead bark bright neon green, and attached cheap plastic leaves to the branches, loudly demanding that everyone praise their landscaping. Then you quietly walk by, a living, breathing, deeply rooted oak tree, swaying naturally in the wind, pulling real water from the deep earth. They absolutely cannot stand the sight of you. They look frantic, running around with a glue gun, trying to frantically reattach their plastic leaves as the wind blows, staring in sheer terror at your effortless organic growth. They feel deeply foolish because you vividly remind them that real life cannot be manufactured, only grown. Number 13. The paranoid hypervigilance of knowing you hold their undeniable truth. When someone builds an entire identity, reputation, or social standing on a massive mountain of lies, half-truths, and carefully constructed manipulations, their greatest, most paralyzing fear is the person who holds the receipts. The people who desperately tried to play you know exactly what they did in the dark. They acutely remember the conversations. They remember the subtle sabotage. They know that you saw entirely behind the curtain, and they know that you possess the exact intellectual and emotional capability to dismantle their entire public persona with a single, well-placed sentence. Yet, your authentic restraint is completely baffling to them. You are operating from a place of supreme sovereign power. You do not feel the desperate need to run to the town square and shout their sins to the masses. You are far too busy building your empire, nurturing your profound peace, and focusing on your massive upward trajectory to care about dragging their name through the mud. You possess the nuclear launch codes to their entire reputation, but you simply placed them in your pocket and walked away to tend to your garden. This level of unbothered detachment is completely incomprehensible to a mind that is constantly at war. The psychology of their frantic behavior is deeply rooted in the agonizing suspense of the undropped shoe. Because they operate on a low-frequency, highly vindictive level, they cannot fathom that you have genuinely moved on. They project their own vindictive nature onto you, entirely convinced that your silence is merely a highly strategic delay. They live in a state of absolute paranoid hypervigilance, waking up every single day wondering if today is the day you finally expose them. Their fragile ego is slowly, loudly cracking under the immense pressure of their own guilty conscience. They are held completely hostage by the undeniable truth you casually carry in silence. It is exactly like a person sitting in a chair, sweating profusely, staring at a ticking time bomb strapped to their chest, absolutely paralyzed with fear. They look across the room and see you holding the detonator. They are bracing for the explosion, begging, negotiating, panicking internally. But you just look at them calmly, toss the detonator casually into the trash can, turn off the lights and leave the building to go enjoy a beautiful sunset. They are left sitting alone in the dark, still sweating, still terrified, unable to move, completely trapped by their own paranoia. They look incredibly goofy, bracing for a severe punishment you do not even care to deliver. They feel profoundly foolish because they realize they are entirely imprisoned by a lock they created themselves. Number 14. They finally understand the absolute, terrifying power of your energetic withdrawal. Toxic, highly performative people absolutely do not generate their own light. They are fundamentally, irrevocably parasitic in their energetic nature. They require a host, someone with pure intentions, vast emotional reserves, and radiant internal alignment to heavily siphon energy from. For a very long time, you were their battery. Your reactions, your attempts to understand them, your willingness to forgive, and your bright, vibrant presence provided them with the energetic currency they desperately needed to feel alive and relevant. They arrogantly mistook your limitless generosity for an infinite, unbreakable tether. The moment of absolute contrast occurred when you finally recognized your own supreme worth and severed the cord. You did not just stop talking to them, you performed a complete surgical withdrawal of your entire spiritual energy. You pulled your massive light entirely back into your own orbit. You stopped thinking about them, you stopped reacting to them, and you completely stopped supplying the emotional friction they so desperately craved. Your internal alignment dictated that your energy was far too precious to be wasted on black holes. The deep psychology of their current meltdown is the primal terror of sudden, absolute darkness. When you withdraw your energy, they are not just losing a friend or a competitor, they are losing their primary vital life support system. Their deep fear of stagnation becomes an agonizing reality, because without your momentum to drag them forward, they instantly stop moving. They are suddenly left completely alone in the vacuous, echoing chamber of their own hollow existence. The script they relied on requires a responsive scene partner, and you have entirely vacated the theater. Think of their experience exactly like a bloated parasite that has spent years comfortably attached to a massive, powerful host, arrogantly believing it is the one steering the ship. Suddenly, the host simply sheds its skin, leaves the parasite entirely behind, and walks out into the blazing sunlight. The parasite is left lying in the cold dirt, frantic, wiggling helplessly, completely unable to sustain its own life force, watching the host disappear entirely over the horizon. From the outside, their desperate attempts to get your attention back through subliminal posts, flying monkeys, or manufactured drama look incredibly tragic and profoundly goofy. They feel ultimately foolish because they finally realize they were never the source of the magic. They were just temporarily standing entirely in your light. When you zoom out and look at the vast, profound architecture of all of this, one undeniable truth becomes absolutely impossible to ignore. The entire dynamic was never about your physical actions, your specific achievements, or the minor details of your daily life. It was always, from the very beginning, a brutal war over your energetic alignment. They targeted you because your raw, unapologetic authenticity illuminated the painful, stagnant reality of their heavily manufactured lives. They desperately tried to break your focus because your unwavering gaze exposed the fragile, hollow nature of their performative masks. But you did not break. You did not conform. You simply observed, elevated, and permanently removed your light from their dark rooms. You do not need to prove anything to these people. You do not need to seek revenge, launch a frantic counterattack, or lower your frequency to explain your beautiful reality to individuals who are utterly committed to their own delusion. Let them sit in the uncomfortable, echoing silence of their own choices. Let them grapple with the terrifying realization that they were entirely outmatched, outclassed, and entirely outgrown. Your only responsibility is to protect your peace, continue building your unshakable internal foundation, and relentlessly pursue the profound destiny the universe has laid out for you. Just keep growing, keep shining, and remain fiercely, beautifully authentic. Make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, drop a comment with what point hit you hardest, and share the video with someone who needs the reminder. Stay chosen, stay blessed.